everybody. Thank you for coming to today's event. My name's Christine Huesner. I'm the project manager for graduate programming at RIT Graduate School. The topic of today is writing a literature review. We chose the literature review since it's a very important part of your research writing, and it requires you to evaluate your relevant resources, put your research in the context of other research in your field, and to recognize potential research opportunities. It can be very daunting the first time you're going through a literature review, as I expect it is for many of you. This literature review writing event is designed to offer you resources and strategies to help you get started. We're going to break it into two parts. One, organizing your research, and then the second part, going about writing. Our speakers today are Koshykar, Librarian for Computing and Information Sciences at RIT Graduate School, and Phil Shaw, the Senior Lecturer and Coordinator for the RIT Writing Center. With that, I'm going to put this over to Roman. And of course, I timed out. There we go.
Thanks, welcome everyone. I'm always excited to present to graduate students about effective organization of research, because a literature review implies that you have to find some literature, begin reading that, and then have something useful to say about writing it. And in preparing this talk, I found this great quote. It sounded like it was one of those, yeah, but did Einstein really say that? Apparently he really did say, if we knew what we were doing, it would not be called research. So my portion of today's program will introduce you to organizing research. And this is being handled at a very high level because the kind of information that you find, the kind of sources that you review, they're all pretty highly specific to the program that you're studying in, your experience with reading about the field that you're studying in. And that's where myself and the other librarians come into play, because we can serve as the subject area experts for finding information specific to the topics that you're studying. But the function of the literature review, if you take a big step back and say, why, I'm not just doing this because I've been assigned to do it. There's a reason why you have to include a literature review in either as a standalone piece of writing or as a part of something greater, such as a capstone project or thesis, or even just a proposal that you're writing. What are we doing here? You're developing in-depth understanding of your topic so that you can demonstrate to the people reading your writing that you have studied this thoroughly. But you also want to understand the broader field. That's very important when you're a graduate student overall. Use this as an opportunity to explore the controversies, the issues, the methodologies, the dead ends in the research, so that when you go about designing your own project in the future, you won't make some of those same mistakes. You can also identify the key researchers. Who has done the most important work, the most impactful work in this area? And can I read more of what they've written? And then if you are incorporating this into a bigger project, how is that project going to fit into the knowledge within your field, really? Common question that I get as a librarian when I'm meeting with graduate students is, but how much do I need? How much do I really need to include? How much do I need to read? And there is no correct answer. You should not aim for X number of citations in your literature review. That's just not really helpful. It's kind of counterproductive. But I think organization of what you're researching and what you'll eventually write about for your literature review is highly integrated just with searching in general. So what you start to find when you search for information, what you start to do when you read the papers that maybe you've been assigned in class, add that into a working bibliography of what you are finding and reading. And this can be easily expanded out too. You can include other articles by those key researchers and other important authors in your field. You can review literature that cites or is cited by something else that you've already written, and add that into this what I call this working bibliography, this collection of information that's important to your review. Which means you're probably going to end up reading more sources than you write about. So you will have to make a selection at some point about what is more important, has something very useful, impactful to say about the project that you're engaging in. And then everything else you've read is more background information. So organization becomes very important because you can imagine that eventually it won't take very long for this to become a very large pool of literature that you've dived into. And myself and the other librarians would like to encourage you to use a citation manager, a program that helps you collect and organize everything that you find in the course of your work, and then also add citations and bibliographies according to whichever format you've been asked to use into the review document and any other paper that you write. So the citation managers, again, they help you do this. They're software applications that do this kind of work. And they have very helpful organization features, and I'm going to show a couple of screenshots of two of the ones that I know the best. Pay attention to things like adding references into collections, tagging them for easier retrieval later, creating shared groups if you're working with colleagues and collaborators, and also annotation features so that you can make notes about what it is that you got out of reading that source, and those notes will be useful in writing about that information in your literature review. So this is a screenshot from Zotero, which is one of commonly used citation management apps. Over there in the left-hand panel, you'll see that you can organize things into collections, which is basically like a folder that you put things in. You can tag things down there at the bottom left. So you could click on or search for a tag, and everything with that tag will be easily retrieved. So if that's about nanotechnology, that's your research project, and you need everything on nanotechnology that you've ever saved, you can easily find it that way. And then you can make notes about individual articles. So if you click on an individual article or record in your Zotero library, then you have the ability to add a note there. So I kind of, as an example, said, I want to say, read this for lit review, so that I'm reminded to do that as I go about writing my literature review. Here's a screenshot from Mendeley, another very commonly used citation management app. They have their own version of collections. Mendeley, though, has slightly different types of the same kinds of features. And then up there at the top, you can open up a notebook in Mendeley. Your notebook is kind of the broad notes to yourself about all of your work. And then if you want to add annotations, that means you're attaching a note to an individual paper that you saved. So depending on what you use and how you use it, there are all sorts of features built into these tools that help you along the way. So you're not alone in this process. We have a lot of information on our website about how to learn to use citation managers. So all of these links will be available on the handout that's a part of this presentation today. So in our, on our info guides page, you can click on citation and information literacy as a category and find the guides that I've put together on teaching yourself how to use EndNote, Zotero, and Mendeley, the ones that I know the best. Also on the RIT Library's YouTube channel, there is an academic publishing and citations playlist category where you can find tutorial series on using EndNote, Zotero, and Mendeley. And in about 30 to 40 minutes from start to finish, you can learn to use any one of these 3 systems just by watching the video tutorials that I've put together. So just a quick screenshot from our library YouTube channel. The category is academic publishing and citations, so it's the citations part that's important here. And then there are the playlists for using Zotero, using Mendeley, using EndNote. Self-paced, learn at your own speed. Go back and watch these videos multiple times if you need to. There are many other resources available. In the interest of time, I can't go through every one of them, which is why, again, these are all provided for you on what you're taking home today after this session. We maintain a guide on our webpage that's just general information about library services for all graduate students. There's a resources for writing theses and dissertations guide. If you are going to be on a thesis or dissertation track, you may want to just take a look at some of the books that we've collected there that describe the overall process. We have a time management tool called the Dissertation and Thesis Calculator, which will help you generate a schedule for tackling that kind of big writing project. It's really in your interest to go and read the literature review portions of previous theses and dissertations from your program so that you get an idea of what is really expected by your advisors. And you can find those in RIT Scholar Works. That's all of the published theses and dissertations from RIT graduate programs. If you want to broaden out your search, you can go to the ProQuest Dissertations and Thesis Global database and find documents in your discipline from many other colleges and universities across North America. And of course, as another resource, you can connect with your subject librarian, whether that's myself or one of the other members of my team. We can talk to you about specific research strategies that you can employ, the sources that are best to use for finding literature in your individual field of study. So I believe we are going to hold all questions till the end, and that means that once you now have a handle on finding and organizing all of these great things you're going to read, you have to be able to say something about it in writing. And that's where our next speaker, Phil Shaw, is going to pick up the thread.
Thank you, Roman. Hello, graduate students. Full disclosure, I'm also currently a graduate student, so I felt the same way you probably did when you saw dissertation and thesis calculator, like the scariest calculator you can describe. And I've been in the Writing Center business for nearly 20 years and have seen lots of literature reviews, lots of versions of literature reviews. And even with that experience, I can say that I'm only moderately qualified to really tell you anything about what your literature review will be. So like Roman said, this is going to be kind of a high-level, somewhat abstract conversation. But again, there's plenty of resources once you get into the specifics of your own. And these adjectives, I think, describe many of those literature reviews that I've seen. And so as an attempt to sort of move towards writing the literature review, I made a PowerPoint about it. Good luck to all of us. The first thing that I thought about was like, what do students actually know about literature reviews? It seems like everyone has a sense of what they are, but as you read through this transcript from an article I read, you can see that people start with kind of an idea of what a literature review is, and the more they talk about it, they begin to talk themselves out of knowing what a literature review is. And that's a common experience. And if that's the way that you're feeling, you are not alone, right? And maybe that's better than a overconfidence. So I think a better question than what is a literature review is what does a literature review do? What is its sort of rhetorical purpose as part of your project? The first is that it synthesizes prior research to develop a view of the field relative to a topic area. That's common across all literature reviews. And what I mean by synthesize is bring together, right? All of these articles are out there, and it's your job as a researcher, before you start your primary research, to kind of get a sense of what's been said so that you're not being redundant or way off topic. It's also to articulate the importance of what research needs to be done in a field. Your research, specifically. Writing the literature review should give you a sense of the importance of what you're writing about. It should identify potentially the practical significance of the research if you're working on something practical and not purely theoretical. And it should critically analyze and compare different research methodologies. So you're not just reading the conclusion to say, okay, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said this. You're also looking at what kind of research they did and how yours fits into that methodologically. So there's kind of a lot going on. And as I said at the beginning, the genre expectations really vary by field, and Roman said that too. So depending on the field that you're in, the literature review is going to look somewhat differently. And it's important to read existing master's and PhD level work. And the RIT ScholarWorks resource is excellent. Your advisor is an excellent resource, especially if you ask something specific of that person, i.e., can you show me some of the work that your students have done in the last 5 years? Right, that'll give you a sense of what's expected. For most of you, the literature review portion of your project is going to fall somewhere between the introduction and the methods section. Right, sort of signaling to the reader, like, look what I learned before I started doing stuff. Put your topic and methodology into the context of the field to join the conversation. That's another way of saying synthesize. But if you think of your field as a conversation that's been happening for many, many years before you entered it, and will likely continue for many, many years after you leave it, this is your opportunity to kind of put your 2 cents in. And that can kind of help to humanize the research too. And again, one way of focusing on synthesis rather than summary is to look for patterns, themes, common questions, and methodological approaches. So you're not just reading for what did they say, but rather how is what they said similar to what someone else said or what I'm attempting to say. And the Zotero, Mendeley, using those tags can be a good way of starting to identify what those patterns are, even if you don't quite have the language for it yet. So where the literature review falls in your process will probably vary. In the Writing Center, I've seen people come in and they've completed all of their primary research and they've written up everything, and then they're like, well, now I have to do a literature review. And I go, well, that's backwards, but we can work with that. But let's say it's an ideal world, and before your project, you decided to go out there and see what's happening. As Roman identified, you can be looking for gaps in the literature. You know, has someone not identified, or is there this sort of consistent problem that I could work towards? You're looking for methodologies that you can adapt, right? So you're looking at secondary research in order to inform your primary research, and looking for guiding principles, concepts, or theories in the field that you think are related to your interests. During and after your project, those priorities shift a little bit. If you're writing your literature review in the 11th hour, right, you're probably looking for people who did similar work to you as a way to justify the work that you already did. And it's not perfect, but it could happen. Or you're looking for evidence to support the findings that you have, or using those principles, concepts, or theories to analyze your results. Regardless of where you are in the project, both of these stages will probably happen. So I think at the top it says, adapted from 14 types of literature reviews. I am not about to try to show you 14 types of literature reviews and encourage you to choose one. That is not the point of this table. The point of this table is to identify 4 of the most common, and it's not really important what they're called so much as what they do. And so I'd encourage you when you're talking with your advisor to maybe pull up this presentation and say, okay, which of these 4 seems most like what you're expecting for this project? The first one, I can see the terror in your eyes. 8 months to 2 years. That's probably not what you're going to do, right? So it's all right. I'm showing you this because a systematic review is a type of review that often stands on its own, right? When you're doing your research and you see somebody who's written a literature review, and it's called literature review, in your field, save that article because that person has done a lot of work for you. And that's typically a standalone kind of genre. And the rapid review is like the baby Diet Coke version of that, all right? So maybe there's elements of this that'll fit into your literature review, something to discuss with your advisor. But these 2, I think, are probably more likely. Look at those those time frames seem manageable. Get out that calculator. The scoping review is that one that's looking for gaps. All right, if you think about scope as starting big and narrowing down, that's what a scoping review does. The traditional narrative literature review is a little bit broader than that, in which you're just trying to pull together as much knowledge about the topic that is relevant to your research. All right, they're very similar. And again, I think in conversation with your advisor, that can start moving you towards what you're expected to do. Now let's talk about structure. Big caveat here. This is not the structure of literature reviews. This is a broad potential structure of some literature reviews. And it's not a particularly complicated or even interesting one. But you'll see that you could use subheadings based on themes or core concepts that you're finding in there. You're not going source by source. I'm going to say that again for emphasis. Do not just go paragraph by paragraph, starting with, according to Hutchins 2009. Don't do that. That will keep synthesis away from your literature review, and you want to bring it in. And plan ahead, read examples for models. You may find yourself reading some of that master's and PhD work that your advisor may have completed 2 or 3 years ago, and you're like, oh, I like the way that looks. That looks manageable, right? Look for those kind of leads in the examples that you find. So you have 3 tools, 3 writing tools at your disposal when it's time to actually sit down with that big digital stack of reading and start to write about it. And the first and probably most common tool in literature reviews is to summarize. But you just told me not to summarize, but to synthesize instead. Well, you got to summarize a little. You got to tell us what it says. What you can see in this kind of absurdist paragraph about bananas are some of the kind of key terminology that you can use when you're summarizing. All right, so you're looking for points of consensus with other researchers. Dole, 1968, Chiquita et al., 1983. Dole works alone, Chiquita had friends. Looking for further research to indicate that you're kind of summarizing through. But this should not be a standalone paragraph, right? And you might find yourself then moving on to talk about Dole or to talk about something else. Or you may talk about a source and then another source and then that same source again, right? And that's where the planning and structuring comes in. This is just an example of some of the academic discourse of summarizing. Tool 2, good old quoting. The time saver that people don't use that often always confuses me. Just copy and put it in. When do you choose to quote is important. And it's one of the things that readers will notice quickly in your literature review. Like, if you quoted that whole big paragraph about bananas, your reader's gonna be like, I don't think that needed to be a quote, right? So what are you looking for? You're looking for new concepts, $50 words, essentially. Strong opinions that the authors are putting out there. Or, and I think that this is the most important, a springboard for you to then say something. So you're like, I read this thing, yada, yada, yada. They say this, and that relates to my research because. Or this is valuable because. Or this has application over here because. All right? Even though most of that will happen in your eventual discussion section, you can signal it in the literature review. Now, the last tool is dangerous. Paraphrasing. And I hesitated to even tell you about paraphrasing, because I think a lot of us, guilty, at some point in our writing career, thought paraphrasing was like changing a word or two in the sentence so you didn't have to quote. No more of that, all right? You can see from this example that it's taking the main ideas and sort of flipping the structure, simplifying it, taking what's actually necessary. Paraphrasing is like a micro summary, right? If you're not going to gloss a whole section of an article, but you just want to point to one kind of thing that an author said because it's relevant, that's where a paraphrase might make sense. Now, I would be remiss in my duties as writing center person if I did not suggest to you that you could find expertise and good listening at the Writing Center for any stage of the process. And I know that both in the Zoom and I think in the materials that you've been sent, there's a Writing Center support page where this sort of middle stuff that's too small to read, it's on there. It's just some good advice to prepare for your Writing Center appointment. Beginning last, I guess 3 semesters ago, we now have graduate students working in the Writing Center. It was previously a undergrad space primarily, but with help from the graduate school, we're now on track, and there's also 2 faculty on staff, and guess who one of them is? Nice to meet you. Finally, if you have time and motivation for recurring or weekly appointments, set them up early in your process. So for instance, if you met with me as you were just beginning to organize the research, we could start to develop an understanding of where you wanted to go, and we would have that kind of shorthand with each other as you continued this process. You wouldn't have to try to explain your research. Not like I'm going to understand most of it anyway, but at least understand the scope of what you're trying to do. And we could meet throughout the semester or 2 semesters, however long your project is going to take. So a couple final thoughts, and this is more related to Roman than the writing itself, but curate your sources. Think of yourself as really pulling together things that are meaningful and important to you and to your research. If you have like rando sources in there, and then you're trying to write about them in the middle of the night, you're going to drive yourself crazy, right? So have your literature together, curated. Synthesize using themes, theories, concepts, see where the connections are. Read lit reviews in your field, ask your advisor, ask your subject librarian, use the RIT ScholarWorks. And when you're asking your mentor or advisor for support, be specific about, don't say, I want to meet with you next week, right? They're busy people. Say, okay, I want to meet next week and here's my agenda. It works in the Writing Center too. Set the goals for those meetings. There's where you can register for appointments for the Writing Center, both online and in person. And that's my email. Feel free to use it. And that's the end of my portion of the presentation. Thanks.